How do we play a big game of Battletech? That's what we're going to explore in this vlog. Doing this Battletech thing, I love big games. There's never enough battle value. I want mechs, I want artillery, I want air support, I want infantry. I'd love to bring in 2 or 3, 4 players. A team game. Let's play some city fight. Let's throw down some buildings. Let's do some city tech. But at the same time, I want to finish the game, or at least get to a point in the game where we know, hey, if this was going to continue, most likely this was going to be the outcome. And one of the interesting things about Battletech, once you get into the dynamics of mech damage and various systems and how they function, the game is a little bit more complex compared to some other wargaming systems. On top of this, with Battletech, the way the phases work and all the different rules that you can layer in and bring over, the game can be pretty streamlined, like we see with the classic game of Armored Combat, or it can be very, very, very complex. So from that perspective, answering the question, opening up the idea, what are some of these explorations if you want to play a big game? Now, most of my Battletech games, it's a weekly thing. We get together. We've got a set amount of time, about 4 or 5 hours to play. Occasionally, we'll set something up on a weekend where we've got all day, or maybe over the course of 2 days, ideally going in and asking the question, how much time do we have to play? What would be a realistic battle value if you only have 2 hours to play Battletech? What does that battle value look like? If we have 4, if we have 6, we have 8, trying to squeeze a reasonable amount of battle value into that time. Now, mech-wise, rules-wise, there are things we can do to speed things up and make them more efficient. Certainly as you gain proficiency, understanding the rules and the various phases of the game, that'll come naturally. I mean, honestly, do not worry about memorizing the rules. You'll learn them by interacting and playing. But what I do find is 2 of the things that make things a little bit easier is having access to a rule book. And if a question comes up, the person who is not asking that question or in that phase continues on and doesn't look up the rule. An example would be my friend is shooting at some of my mechs and they kind of want to do something and they're looking at a weapon system and they're like, I'm not really sure how this works. Well, you know what? I'll look the rule up. You continue firing. Go through and fire the rest of your weapons and see what happens. So the ability to look up rules or settle a dispute or a question, I think that's a good starting point. Second to this, if there's the possibility, and it's not always possible based on space, it's a different Battletech experience if we're playing at the store, at the club, or at home, having a reference sheet. It comes with the Game of Armored Combat pack-in. There's lots of files to download, PDFs, but essentially a screen that shows the mechanics, the hit locations, the modifiers, some of the different pilot check, terrain, something that I can quickly look and calculate what I'm going to do. So I like to have one of those for each player. Second to that would be having my technical readout, my mech sheets printed out and set aside or grouped by lance that I can see them all and I can interact and I can track the heat, I can track the damage. Having them laid out when it comes time to move with initiative, I can easily see where I have to do and how I have to do it. Having that as opposed to maybe the stack of sheets and I got to leaf through them or I got to find them or I switch in and out. But again, that takes the footprint of the game and makes it a little bit more complex, a little bit bigger. I've got my 2 or 3 hex maps, my dice, my tokens, my templates, and then I've got to lay out 4, 5, 6, 8, 10 sheets. But that's the ideal. I find having those 2 things will speed up a game. The next would be hopefully going into the game an understanding of what rules do we want to incorporate? What do we want to do? And being able to adjust that based on the size of the game and how much time we have to play. If we're playing a really, really big game, City Fight, City Tech, maybe we don't want to include the destruction rules for buildings. It is tactical. It's nice to be able to sweep through and blow up buildings and remove infantry that way and remove cover. But if we're playing with 5 lances each, plus air support, plus infantry, plus tanks, we've got 30, 40, 50 pieces on each side. That having destructible buildings and tracking that and doing that does take an awful lot of time. So maybe looking at the rules and saying, let's not play with air support. Let's not play with artillery. Let's not play with hidden units. Coming ahead of time and deciding as a group what we're going to play, how we're going to do it. Having those two things, I find, are some steps to start streamlining the game and make it as efficient as possible to keep the flow of the game going. So whatever that time period is, we can get the most. Now, turning it over to my fellow mech warriors, mech commanders, playing a big game of Battletech. First question is, what does that look like? What battle value does that look like? When I say big game, are you like 10K, 15K battle value? And what are some of the things that you can do to streamline that game and make it as efficient as possible to not only complete the game, but keep the players engaged so you don't lose that narrative along the way?